All right, Claire, Roger, and Dave, shall I get started?
Yeah.
All right.
Sure.
Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Today's Thursday, so it is Jordan Peterson Thursday. And as always, I'm delighted to have Roger and Claire lead this meetup. And today the panelist is Dave. So with that, over to you, Roger and Claire.
All right. Thank you, Shrikant, and thank you everyone for joining us today. So today we'll be covering Rule 10 of Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. And the rule is be precise in your speech. In this chapter, Peterson will be making a case for why being precise in your speech is useful and often necessary to resolve complex issues of everyday life. He's first going to explain how our minds perceive reality, and he's also going to explain why it's necessary for us to often oversimplify the world to a practical level in order to handle different problems. From there, he'll make the case that this simplification also includes humans as well as ourselves. And because of how our perceptions function and our need to simplify the world, others, ourselves, and the world, others, and ourselves, precision is a necessity to resolve any issue between those. But as we'll see, it's a lot easier than it sounds, or it's a lot harder than it sounds. So I would like to, the first section is going to start with why is my laptop obsolete? And Claire or Dave, did you guys have any good anything you added on that?
This section starts off with something we all deal with. Why do you have to buy a new iPhone every 3 years? Why do these tools become old? And the first idea here is quite simple, which is that our perceptions are much more real than the actual objects that we interact with every day. It's actually what we're seeing is our perception of that thing and that thing's utility rather than the thing itself. And when it comes to laptops, these are pieces of plastic and metal, but they're much more than that, and they depend on a much larger structure. And he's using that to kind of as a metaphor for the interdependence of every single thing really in the world that we hold on this invisible system and on every other individual thing. And he sees this as sort of there's a social contract of trust that we sort of say, okay, there's this invisible interconnectedness, but we're only going to read the top line of it. And we're going to perceive these things as individual. He uses again the metaphor of a leaf. So you see a leaf, you pick up a leaf, but if you take away the tree or the weather or your experience there, that leaf doesn't even exist or has a different experience. And in that way, really almost everything that we see and that we hold is just like that. It's nothing more than a series of interactions with other things.
Yeah, I grew up with a rotary dial phone. You may have seen in a museum. I'm 73 years old, used to work for the phone company. But yeah, the technology changes over the years have been amazing. But I think is it called Moore's Law, whatever, that the capacity of a computer doubles every couple of years and the price is cut in half every couple of years. It's just amazing the power and the capabilities, just your phone anymore, just amazing. But that's enough for now.
And so when we see something like a phone, exactly, we don't see the materials, but we see a tool. We see an extension of ourselves. And so this next section he kind of gets into is tools, obstacles, and extensions to the world. And that we don't see sort of these valueless entities and we attribute meaning, but we attribute the meaning right away, that we see it as the tool immediately. We inhibit useful things, not the things themselves. And the world sort of starts to reveal itself to us as something to use and not something in itself, I guess.
I like the example when you're out in the forest, you sit down a tree stump, it's exactly the same as sitting down a chair at home. So it has exactly the same value. And from his point of view, they are exactly the same thing. So it's, to me, a very interesting concept.
Yeah, and for me, this actually helped me see a question that we would always think about in philosophy class. And it's like a 101 philosophy question of what is a chair? And the idea was always is like, well, language seems to be flexible. You can't ever seem to quite define anything, but we seem to all have this concept of chair. And putting it under Peterson's perspective, it's like, well, if the meaning of everything's first derived from its practical use, well, then a chair is anything that functions as a chair, right? And language is just the limiting factor there. But I really like that. And I do like this idea of like, first and foremost, what we see in the world is what are the things that we can interact and how can we interact with them? It's a mapping of everything in a physical form, which goes to the second section of tools, obstacles, and extensions into the world. And so what he's trying to point out here is that we are extremely limited creatures. And because of the limitations of evolution, we can't process the entire world. We actually can't process a lot of information. We have to extremely oversimplify just within the hardware. And then past that, whatever we actually see is even more simplified. So it's like a simplification of a simplification. And what he kind of points out is since we don't see objects, what we see is the things that we can interact with at the level that we can interact with them. So for example, with how Claire pointed out about the laptop, a laptop is great. It's, everything that a laptop's supposed to be until it stops working. And then the laptop becomes something you don't understand, right? It becomes a magic box that makes, that used to make Zoom happen, but doesn't happen anymore. Now it's just a magic box and God knows what's in it and God knows how it actually works. And what he points out from there is that this simplification doesn't just apply to things, it also applies to other people. We oversimplify people we interact with, mostly because what we're interested in is not actually getting to know the other person, but how should I act towards that other person in a way that they act predictable. And then he takes it one step further and he says, and we simplify ourselves. We don't fully understand our own processes. We don't fully understand what we feel or what we do, which is constantly why you'll notice you constantly surprise yourself. You'll do things you didn't think you would do. You act in ways other than what you want to be acting. I think otherwise we'd all be very much in shape, eating healthy, and everyone earning $1 million in some way, right? So we don't seem to know ourselves. We don't seem to know the people around us, and we don't seem to know our world in an objective manner. We know it much more at a practical level. And from there, he also points that even our own limitations, in other words, like the limitations of our bodies, can change. He points out the example of a screwdriver, that we can actually use a screwdriver, especially if we're in a tight little space, and feel around with the screwdriver and use that as an appendage to map around in a place where we otherwise wouldn't be able to, in the same way we would with a finger. Another idea that you could think of is when you're driving. And I think before we started, I mentioned the example of a lot of times I'm amazed when if you have someone who's had their car for quite a while, you'll see them get into really, really tight spots. And they'll do it quite fast, fully knowing that they can make it. And it's like, well, it's not like they can tell this. It's almost just a sensation. It's like, oh yeah, I definitely can fit in there. And they'll make, quick parallel park very impressively. And it's the idea that when they're in the car, what's their embodied, they can sense the limits of their car. They become a part of that. And then when they get out of it, it shrinks back to their own body. So Peterson's main point here is how our ideas can shift. And did you guys want to take anything for? Yeah.
Yeah, and that really extends to other people too, right? So the classic example here is the mother that sacrifices herself for her child. She doesn't see that as for someone else. She sees that as really an extension of herself. The one I really resonate here with is movies. When you're sitting in a movie theater, you feel what these people feel. You feel their history, and you're right there with them. That's what makes them so stimulating. And of course, in a big group, when it comes to sporting events, I mean, when your team wins, there's literally science that people's testosterone goes up, that the impact is literally on their being, on their chemistry. And so in that way, their group, it does impact them. And war is a classic one too. What are you willing to sacrifice for your country, for this patriotism? that is again an extension of yourself. And so he's starting to paint this picture of everything that we perceive from the laptops that we type on to the people that we are is an interconnected web and not one thing.
Right.
Yeah,
And go ahead,
the
Dave.
tool I thought of, because I'm kind of a cook, is the spatula, and how his point of it is it's an extension of your hand. You don't even think about it, that it's an extra foot long or whatever, but I want to reach down and stir some eggs in my skillet. I don't have to say, okay, hand, push forward an inch and down 15 degrees. You just stare at the end of the spatula, it does it automatically. And if I'm at a dinner party and I turn around, my brain knows that, I don't stab anybody. That thing is sticking out, so I either push it down or I compensate. But yeah, it's amazing. Yeah.
And so his main point from this section seems to be one, how much we simplify and how much our own concepts are very plastic. And then the second thing is all this simplification and all of this automation, which is essentially what you're actually doing, is learning routines that you can repeat over and over again, only works when the world works in the way you're expecting it to. In other words, when what you think is going to happen happens. Like, as long as that's happening, all your simplifications are perfectly fine. However, as he points out in this next section, when it misbehaves, as he calls it, there's now a very different problem, because now your oversimplification is wrong, right? Whenever, for example, I think he uses a car as an example. It's like you're driving to work, and then your car, you're driving to work, you understand your car. Your car is the thing that you get in and you drive from point A to point B. And as you're driving, suddenly, your engine makes a noise you've never heard and it stops moving. And now it's like, well, no, now I don't understand my car at all. In fact, my car, as far as what I want it to do, isn't anything that's useful to me now. Now it's just a giant, heavy piece of metal that I need to find some way to turn it back into what it was, because that's the only way it's actually a car to me. The only way it's actually useful to me in any way.
And a car is a perfect example because it's made up of all these individual parts, just like the world, just like our bodies are made up of tiny little cells that make up these larger organs, and same thing of atoms. And so when we don't see those until something goes wrong. And then suddenly the complexity that is just there all the time becomes overbearing. And Peterson says, when the more complex world that was always there, invisible and conveniently ignored, makes its presence known, it is then that the walled garden we archetypally inhabit reveals its hidden but ever-present snakes. So suddenly, not only is the car broken, but like everything has snakes, because you realize how complex everything is.
Right. So because the idea of basically being is once the car doesn't work the way you were anticipating it to, a million different things could be wrong. But the one thing you do know is your oversimplification of what you thought this thing could do was wrong, because it didn't do that, right? It didn't get you to work on time like it should have. It's like, okay, well, how do I fix that? I don't know. Like, we don't know. We have no idea what engines are. We have no. And then the second problem is like, and we also have no idea what the consequences of not making it to work on time are. Am I going to get fired because of this? Am I not going to get that promotion? And it's like, okay, how am I going to move? And what he's pointing at is that normally we have a plan and we have a method of getting to that, right? However, once that's disrupted, all these other options have to become available, because our plan was obviously flawed. It was missing some information. We oversimplified somewhere, but we have no idea where. We have no idea if we oversimplified because we bought a lemon, right? This car was doomed to not work from the beginning. We don't know if we oversimplified because the car dealership screwed us over. We don't know if the simplification is, it's like, was I driving too hard? Did I do something wrong? Or like, was it just chance? Or there's a million different causes, and you have no idea at what level of analysis you're supposed to take this on. And what he points out is when you do get it to a mechanic, go ahead, Claire.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, so when you do get it to a mechanic, essentially what the mechanic's job is, it's twofold, right? He or she accomplishes two things at the same time. They both fix your car and fix your simplification of the car, right? They say, it's like, all right, look, this thing will now do what it's expected to do. Also, now you can act as though this thing will do what you originally thought it was going to do anyway. And now you don't need to think about it. You don't need to worry about it as much. Although I did put the note that though you perhaps might remain slightly more attentive to any changes to your simplified map of the thing. So if like your car sounds a little bit louder, a little bit weirder, you'll notice it more quicker.
Yeah, and we all have these experiences, right? Whether I was just telling these guys before we started, I just started a new job, and the chaos of the problems that I have to solve in this new group of people, I can't even shop at the grocery store. It takes me twice as long. Like basic decisions are thrown off. And so he's going to move into this next section and start to talk about really an extended metaphor that he'll use throughout the rest of the chapter, which is the cheating husband or cheating wife. Someone's cheating.
Cheating husband.
Cheating
Yeah.
husband. And so this story of you think the ground is safe within your feet, you think you have your future planned, you think you know a person, and suddenly you realize that your entire perception of the world was wrong. And when things break down, everything that has been ignored rushes in. When things are no longer specified with precision, the walls crumble and chaos makes itself known. And suddenly it just feels like the ground under your feet is uneasy.
And yeah, the main, because what Peterson is essentially going to be talking about is an encounter with chaos, or like you start to see the chaos that's always been there, but you just have always ignored it because you were taught to ignore it. And the reason you were taught to ignore it is the way you want to act in the world never required you to actually see or notice that stuff. But when something like that happens, all of the questions that you're asking yourself as to what could have been might possibly be important, since the amount of the unknown information is infinite, but which of them are relevant is also an unknown question. So you don't know what information you should be paying attention to. And as Claire was alluding to, when he brings up the case of, you can imagine this great, sweet housewife that's always been loyal to her husband and loving and fine and caring, suddenly walking one day and seeing her husband with another woman, acting in a way that she can't quite just rationally shake off. And what he points out there is like, okay, what happens when that happens? What happens when you look into that? And right, what he points out is like, well, at that point, her entire idea of her husband collapses and something else takes its place. And what takes its place is a stranger that's both frightening and unknown. And it's like, well, why? It's like, well, because the person that I thought was my husband is not my husband, because my husband wouldn't do that, right? Like everything I understand about my husband would not do that, but he's still sitting here having coffee with this, beautiful other lady. So it's like, so how, like, then I don't know anything about this person and I don't know who they are. And then he points out, but it's even worse, because if that's the case, now it also brings her own theory of herself into question. It's like, who am I? I thought I was a loving, caring wife that was in a situation where like I was also loved back and cared for back. And now because this is happening, obviously that can't be the case. So therefore, what does that mean for me and what I think of myself? And this is what Peterson normally calls a descent into chaos, an idea of like your own belief structure starting to crumble.
And from my experience of 2 marriages and 2 divorces, this very well hit home. And you probably heard the expression, don't rock the boat. And, we'll just kind of smooth it over. So many people, so many couples, a little thing goes wrong, and I better not say anything at all, because then she'll bring up what I did the last time when I said, let's go to the restaurant that was rotten. So I think that's really where this title for this chapter comes from. Because to me, I think this may be a love letter to his wife, Tammy, that you need to speak precisely about what's troubling you. And when it really gets down to it, you really need to have an argument. You really need to have a fight to save a marriage. Because so many times, so many people, and some of you are where I worked with a divorce recovery program for 10 years, you don't see anything until it's too late. and your spouse files for divorce, and you say, "Oh, I should have said something."
And yeah, that leads us perfectly into the next section, which is what do you see then? So what happens when you get hit by that bus? You are descending into chaos. Everything you know about yourself in the world is fleeting. What do you even see? He uses the metaphor of the Twin Towers. What did we feel as a country after those buildings fell? And well, it certainly is chaos that you see. And he kind of takes us through the reaction. So first our bodies kind of freeze up. That's a fight or flight reaction. And then the sort of immediate reflexes of our body, they shade into emotion. We start to grapple with this. We start to use our perception to see it. We prepare for the worst or the best. We cry, we talk, we think, and slowly we begin to parse the order from the chaos. And that to Peterson is just fundamental with life. That's the juice, that's the work of it. And so in this case of the wife, she starts to, as Roger said, she asks a lot of questions. What did I do? Is this my fault? Did I set it up? At what point did I go wrong? All of this. And she realizes that her house was built on a foundation of sand, and she starts to see where that sand is. She's in hell, and she needs to figure out how she got there. And that sort of leads us into the next section is there's no such thing as a dragon, I think is what it's called, about where did she go wrong? What was the first indication, the first marker that she could have stopped, that she could have seen, that she not acknowledged? And what is that for all of us in all of our interactions? Is there anything else I'm missing before we go into the dragon?
Oh, well, yeah, the only thing is that, like, for Peterson, this is what normally you identify as a descent into the underworld. So you have an encounter with the dragon of chaos in mythological terms, right? It's the ultimate unknown. It's that void of things that are around us that we just presume can't hurt us until they can. And then after that destroys our structure. So now the underworld, we have to basically explore all the parts we don't want to explore to figure out what the hell happened, right? They're like, why? It's like, for his example, it's like, when did he start cheating on me with it? Did I know? Was there warning signs? Did I ignore the warning signs? How much of this was on me? How much of this is on him? And trying to parse out what exactly was going on. But yeah, and go ahead if there's.
Yeah, so then what do we do? Well, we face your issues first. And Peterson says, don't underestimate the destructive powers of omission. Let me just pull up the dragon story because I can tell it because it's really, really cute. There's a children's book called There's No Such Thing as a Dragon. And basically a little boy sees a dragon under his bed and he goes back and forth to his mom saying, there's a dragon, there's a dragon, there's a dragon. And she says, well, no, there's not, no, there's not, no, there's not. And suddenly the dragon grows and grows and grows until it takes over the entire extent of the house. And by that point, it's a giant problem versus if she had just kind of accepted the dragon to begin with. Am I missing any elements of the story? I just am pulling this from memory.
No, yeah,
to
that's
me,
perfect.
Okay.
to me, this brings up the innocence of children.
Right.
You know, the young boy in the parade was the one that they saw the emperor had no clothes. That a lot of times a child will be direct, and where the parents are saying, "Oh, no, it's not it at all," or whatever. And yeah, that was a really cute story to make that point that the adults don't always know best.
Yeah, for me, this is one of my favorite stories in Jordan Peterson. I mean, the idea that if you ignore something, if you ignore a problem, it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And moment you start paying attention to it, it becomes smaller.
Right.
So it's like the power of attention and the destructive nature of evasion. And I think, like, people think in terms of, like, I think the point about omission is very deep because, it's the attention, your ability of paying attention to difficult objects. This is William James' formulation. That is the heart of your will, heart of the driving force that's going to make things better. And it's about paying attention to difficult objects. It is easy to pay attention to non-difficult, easy objects. It is hard to pay attention to difficult objects. And yeah, go ahead.
And in the dragon story, I guess that's the punchline, is that you still have a dragon even when you acknowledge it in the first place. You just have a cat-sized dragon versus a dragon that's the size of your house. And so wouldn't you rather have just acknowledged it in the first place? And procrastination for me is the ultimate example of that. Wouldn't you have rather just done the work in the first place than dragged your life through hell lying about it afterwards?
Yes, and his point that, if you continuously ignore the dragon, it's going to become a size that is going to just uproot the whole house. Right. And then you can't do anything about it. It's kind of beyond fixing. Okay.
Yep.
And
go ahead.
Oh, I also like that from there, he kind of jumps into one of the most common dynamics that I think might have gotten him on a little bit of trouble, but I think it's mostly because of misunderstanding of what he was saying, which is the things on gender norms. And he points out that, look, the traditional gender norms were things that, historically had been agreed upon and likely, were unfair, especially within modern day context. But he also points out that's there is something that we haven't quite fully grasped as a society, however, is getting rid of those gender norms. Though it can give the freedom to do whatever you want, also gets rid of who's responsible for what. And that now has to be renegotiated, right? Because you may say, it's okay, it is unfair that women are always the housekeepers. It is unfair that men are the ones that are expected to always earn the money and all these things. Okay, what then should be the norm? And who gets to decide that? And who should decide that? And how is it going to get decided? And Peterson kind of makes this point that one of the things that we seem to be currently as a society struggling with is the complexity of that problem. Because there's only once you throw out the old rules, there's three main outcomes to the situation. Either you become the slave, in other words, you do whatever your partner wants you to do. You become the tyrant, you're the person determining what to do, or you have to negotiate. And for the slave, he says, look, with this idea of complexity and the fact that we don't like it when things are overly complex, the slave reduces complexity by simplifying the world in the sense of, okay, just tell me what to do and I'll do it, right? You're responsible. I'll do whatever you need me to do. But at the end of the day, it's on you if we do something wrong. The tyrant at the same time has a similar simplification. I'm in charge of everything. I don't need to worry about you. You're just someone who will do what I want you to do. But he points out that both of those also have an internal flaw. The slave will naturally always want to rebel, and there'll be resentment that grows within that relationship. And the tyrant will eventually get tired of the slave because there's no one actually there. It's just a reflection of themselves. And what he points out then about negotiation is the option's most likely the most desirable one. However, it's also the most difficult to accomplish because it requires that both people painfully admit what they want and what they need and then express how they can aim for that. And most people, one, don't know how to negotiate, and two, don't even know what they want. So getting that all out on the table, admitting that to themselves and then also to their most intimate partners is a very difficult struggle that we should all be doing and that we naturally will have to do. But it's a problem that he kind of points out. It's a lot of us don't seem to be aware that that's what's going to follow next. It's it'll in the end benefit us. But it is going to be a hard struggle between the renegotiation of the sexes through tradition and things like that.
Yeah, it's a really great parallel. He says sort of the escape from tyranny is often followed not by paradise, but by a sojourn in the desert, aimless, confused, and deprived. And of course, there's biblical implications there. But that's something that I see that, yes, there's tyranny associated with our history along all sorts of social constructs. But parsing that together has to do with looking at each little thing and figuring it out and separating the bad from the good and not just throwing the baby out with the bathwater and starting over. And we know that to be true through history. He says life is indistinguishable from effortful maintenance in every little piece. So don't avoid conflict, don't remain vague, don't refuse to investigate. why would you refuse to specify when just specifying that dragon and seeing that little baby dragon would start to enable the solution of getting over the fear of the dragon being in the house in the first place.
And I also like that he points out that, this is a quote that I wrote because I really liked it. Every single unprocessed, uncomprehended, and ignored reason for marital failure will compound and conspire against you. In other words, every little thing you brush off, right, that may just seem like, whatever, it's not worth it, or it's like, I don't want to get in another fight, or I don't want to bother with this again. It's a debt, and it just stacks, right? And he used the analogy of the dragon under the rug just gets a little fatter every time you choose not to have those discussions. Every time you just push that off and just say, it's like, whatever, I'll deal with it. Today I'll deal with it, or today I don't have the time. And the issues just keep compounding, essentially. So it's this idea that, like, if you don't address those issues, they eventually will come back to haunt you in a very serious way. And from there, he also puts in a little bit of a shadow element from a Jungian standpoint of confronting the chaos, because the idea is, well, why don't people just then deal with their problems, especially when they're smaller? It seems like that would be easier. Why put them off? And Peterson lists two really big ones that I think are really good. He says, well, first of all, there's the actual risk of chaos. Naturally, that's one of the things we're evolved to not like. We don't like when we don't know. That's one of the main indicators of something that we're scared of, is we just don't know what it is or what we're going to do about it. So there's that, right? So, for example, the woman before she catches her husband, having, that slight sense, and, rather than asking those questions, just kind of leaving it alone, because it's like, who knows what might actually lie under there. But then he points out the second one, and it's the risk of finding yourself in hell. And what he means by that is, you may find out that you're someone whose laziness and spite is the cause of the issue, and that you're not actually the victim, that you might be the reason. And I think that, like, when I read that, I was like, I fully understand what that's like. That idea of, if it's a problem outside of you, you can run away from it, you can avoid it, you can fix it, you can blame it. If you're the problem, that's a much harder thing to take on. And many people, and the temptation is extremely understandable, just rather not even bother to look at that part. They'd rather just say, like, yeah, you know what, it's working well enough right now, let's just keep moving. So I really liked how he covered the little shadow part of our own unwillingness to look at ourselves.
Absolutely. And from there, he's going to talk about that look and how we look, and we need to use words in order to do it. And that's really difficult. So he says that both the entire psyche of the soul and the world are really organized through language and through communication, and that's complex and it's tangled. And so in that way, specifying the nature of things, including ourselves, is extremely difficult, but it's relevant and it's the work. And while it's difficult to fix damaged things will continue to function. I mean, machinery will continue to be broken machinery until you fix it. It doesn't magically reappear. And so that work to him is precision, and in aiming accurately and separating sort of the wheat from the chaff as he moves into the next section.
And yeah, and real quick, I also do want to just hit on this idea that he points out, that to do that, anytime you do have a problem, it needs to be manifested in language, which he gets a little bit in towards the end of the next section. But he also says, anytime you do have an issue, you have to consider two things. One, if anyone else was in this position, would they have a reasonable and justifiable reason to feel the way you do? And then two, am I being overly immature, and do I just need to grow up and get over it? And he's like, and you should approach those as though both of those are possible and likely, right? As at 50-50, it could be one way or another. And he says that this may lead to very difficult questions about yourself, and very difficult questions about figuring out what it is you want and what it is you actually need, genuinely and truly. But he says, but the difficulties are relevant, because the alternative is always going to be worse. The alternative to just let it accrue will always make you pay way more than any pain you're going to feel trying to deal with it before it gets to that level. Which brings us to the last section of separating the wheat from the chaff. And I do like how he kind of points out that when something bad happens, it will always come in if you've left something to grow, it will come back and hurt you when it is strongest and when you are weakest. And the reason that's the case is it's been building up and building up until it's too much, it hits its limit, and it's when you're least expecting it and not prepared for it because you've been choosing to ignore it for so long that once it, the bills due, you're not going to be prepared for the situation. Like in the situation with the woman who has a cheating husband, right? She's just let all the problems that led to this situation accrue that she never bothered to address them. And the husband's just, if not more, at fault in this, right? But both of them have just kind of let this play out to the point where it gets so destructive that there's no salvation anymore. But from there, he kind of brings it up to, why do we need precision then? Well, precision is what allows you to separate the problem from everything else. It allows you to be able to be extremely precise in what it is that needs to be addressed, where it is that we're failing, and what it is that you need to take on. And a good example of this that he gives is, you can imagine you have a pain and you don't want to tell the doctor. And at that point, that pain could be anything. And you'll have a million different, things running in your head of what it could be. But as long as you leave it alone, as long as you don't address it, it remains this ambiguous thing that could be anything, but isn't really anything at all. And what he points out is that when you ask your doctor and you're able to identify it, it collapses, kind of like the dragon in the story, it collapses into the thing that it is and not all the other things it could be. And it's still an issue. You're still left with the dragon. You're still left with whatever it is that they do find. But at least you may have a possibility to do something about it. And even if you don't, you at least have an understanding of the actual situation. You're not lying to yourself and blinding yourself. And for that, he kind of points out that this is what brings, he goes a little bit biblical. This is the word, the truth that brings habitable order, right? The idea of courageous and truthful words will render your reality simple, pristine, well-defined, and habitable. And go ahead.
There's a truth-telling element here too, of course, right? In that identifying things and speaking about them truthfully will simplify them. And that doesn't need to be done with an understanding of all of the things and the complexity, but even, in my experience, just identifying what you don't know and saying, and living in those little tiny moments of truth and speaking them carefully, bringing attention to your language to him really is the anecdote here.
Right. And he also points to the alternative that if you're not precise in your speech, if you're not precise in addressing your concerns, your issues, your own truths, then that vagueness creates kind of a fogginess where the problem isn't well defined and therefore the solution can't be well defined. And he notes this as a good symptom and I'm sure almost everyone's had this at least once in a relationship, where there's a fight that just keeps devolving into a fight about everything, right? Mm-hmm. Where it's the same fight you've had 20 times. And it's like, well, why? It's like, well, because there's no actual problem you're trying to solve. You're trying to express something you have an issue with, but then it's too general. So then it's not specific enough. And you eventually just end up talking about the same things you guys have been talking about forever, right? And he points out that no one can ever have a conversation about everything. It's an impossible issue. So you have to be precise in what the issue actually is to be able to get what's wrong. And he says, like, this also requires an extremely hard part, as that before you have that fight, you have to ask yourself, well, what exactly is wrong? One. And the second question is, what do I want that would fix it? It's like, those are the answers you have to have before you can even engage in those fights, because otherwise, as he said, like, it just devolves into whatever. So
and this is so true of everything. I mean, to bring Dalio into this, he says separate the people from the problem. So we all have those work meetings that start up with a goal, and then you end up talking about that same shit you've been talking about for the last 6 months, and someone wants to do Snapchat ads and you just want to shoot them in the face. And so starting to bring precision to what are the goals, and bringing people back to that all the time, it creates meaning. It creates flow. It's really everything.
And just finally to close it up, in asking what is wrong exactly, that would imply that there's a right, which implies that there's a direction or a goal in your life. And kind of what he's pointing is you must determine where you're going in your life. Walking around aimlessly isn't going to get you in any direction. It's actually just going to be extremely frustrating, and you're wasting time and energy. It's like, and if you're walking aimlessly, you're never going to get to your goal because you don't have one. So he closes the chapter, and I think this is a good way to close the talk with some of this advice. Confront the chaos of being. Take aim against the sea of troubles. Specify your destination and chart your course. Admit to what you want. Tell others around you who you are. Narrow and gaze attentively and move forward forthrightly. Be precise in your speech. And that'll be it.
Wonderful. Now it's on to questions. We have 4 rules. Number 1, type exclamation mark in the chat or raise your hand in Zoom in order to talk. Number 2, keep on topic. Number 3, be brief. And number 4, be courteous. With that, Joe, give me just a second. Let me go ahead and enable the sound. Okay, so it's going to be Joe followed by Julian, followed by Aaron. Joe, go ahead.
Hey guys, thank you again for this presentation this evening. I really appreciated it. You know, one of the things that I really thought about with this particular chapter was, or rule, was the relationship between Rule 10 and Rule 8 and how important they are with one another. And actually, Shrikant actually touched upon the critical point when he talked about the power of omission. And the omission is, you know, meaning we failed to do something that we're supposed to be doing. So I was wondering if you could just expand. I know Claire had already mentioned this, but the importance of being honest with ourselves as a way of being precise with our language, because I see those two as being inextricably linked in the as far as the rules are concerned. Thanks.
Well, to get biblical, I think it goes back to, I think we had a presentation a couple months ago by a man talking about me complaining about the splinter in your eye when I've got a beam in my eye. It's so easy to be critical of the other when we have our own work to work on.
Yeah, and then there's also the simplification problem where, since we naturally have to simplify, if you're already functioning with lies, you're just going to use those to simplify yourself, right? So then you already conceptualize yourself in a way different than who you are. You can think of just someone who thinks that everyone likes them and they're lying to themselves, and no one does, right? Like, very quickly, reality and what they think is going to happen deviate.
Yeah, I think as we're talking about this, I think pointing yourself toward a life of truth and precise speech in most cases is going to involve going into hell and dealing with all of this stuff, because I just think in most lives you've built up some element of falsehoods in your interaction with others, in your perception with yourself, and also in your just precision that you're looking at these things. And so I think orienting our lives to a life of truth both of these things require kind of throwing everything out and really looking at everything, going into hell and grappling with it in order to put back one by one the bricks that are truth. And in order to do that, you have to kind of look at stuff really, really, really precisely. So I absolutely think that these two are totally connected.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I mean, I think honesty is the foundation of saying that honesty is a commitment to look at reality. Mm-hmm. And precision sits on the top of that. That is, precision is about how do you do it? You do it through speech by identifying the limits of things, by specifying things. And what that does is that is how you that is your method, that is a human method of getting at the truth. By speaking it out and looking at it and checking it against reality, you'd be able to more specifically identify what is going on. So it's kind of, it sits on the top of honesty. Next up is Julian, followed by Aaron. Julian, go ahead.
Hey guys, thanks for the presentation. I'm just wondering if you think the concepts talked about can be applied politically. I feel like a lot of people kind of descend into chaos when, you know, something unexpected or too radical comes up. And instead of going to the mechanic and understanding the complexity of the world, they kind of stick to their simplified view of things, kind of closing themselves from, you know, the complexity. And what do you think about that?
Well, I'm a political animal here. It's so tempting to start off the argument by saying, "Why are you so stupid?" Which you probably realize doesn't win too many arguments. But what I've been doing lately, and I learned from the Apostle Aaron, who I notice here tonight, ask a question. Why do you believe what you believe? Of course, the other thing I love to say is, well, I'd agree with you, but then we'd both be wrong. But we have to have a civilized conversation and not talk past each other.
Yeah, I would also agree on the precise aspect of it. Is that a lot of times, especially nowadays, what I see is a lot of semantic games of like both people using the same word but meaning completely different things, and then both people just arguing over their definition of the word, right? So a lot of times that makes conversation almost impossible because like the two completely different arguments are happening. But yeah, a lot of times asking people to explain what it is they believe, because more than likely, this is something a philosophy professor told us once, like more than likely, if you're saying that the other side is stupid, it's more likely that you just don't understand their argument, right? It's much more likely that you don't understand their argument than that that person actually is as stupid as you think they are. It's like they may have other reasons for believing what they are. Now, sometimes that's not always the case, right? Sometimes they're just, you know, but most of the time that's not going to be the case. So engaging with very precise speech and defining your terms and making sure that the words that you are using are understood as how you meant them to be used, not using someone else's definitions, because then what you said can be taken to mean something completely different if that's not already established.
Okay, next up is Aaron. Aaron, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Roger, Claire, and Dave for a wonderful presentation as always. One thing I want to add to this, though, is I definitely believe in the transparent talk, but timing. Like, if you're telling the truth to somebody, you may not want to hit them right when they come back from work. You may want to not have a deep conversation right before lunch when they're hangry or like starving for a meal. And you don't want to speak the truth after another explosive argument, and then you're kind of just adding on to that. So I think finding that magical time in your week where you know you're both not busy and in fairly good moods to speak the truth is really going to make that much of a difference, because the truth spoken at the wrong moments could be a firestorm, but the truth spoken at the right moment could save a marriage or a relationship.
My favorite tool was to say, hey, let's go for a walk. It's good if it's in a relaxed setting and maybe away from the house where different rooms or even different chairs might have meaning and power structure.
That gives me a panic attack, though. I would immediately just say, what's wrong? What's the walk about?
Yeah, set up the routine. But that's actually a great idea, Dave.
Next up is Abram. Abram, go ahead.
Oh, hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm using new mic system, and thank you very much. I'm glad. I think like everything else, it can be misused. So I mean, be precise. So I wonder, it can be a stumbling block. I agree with what Shrinkan said. The base should be honest, and on top of it, try to your words aligned with where it comes from. I agree with that. But because of that, I think if there is a certain pressure, let's say very conscious people, and there are less conscious people join, they see so much precision is going on, let's say, he might be intimidated, hard to join the group. So it's not what Peterson is saying, but I think, like for example, freedom from, freedom to, let's say, it's a little different, but be precise requires trial. That's what I'm saying. It's hard to be precise from the get-go, so to speak. So how can you be okay with yourself? We tend to be more generous toward ourselves. And how can we be okay with others? I mean, that space. Yeah, for me, it seems not easy. I usually hang out with people who are very precise in words. But I find myself that sometimes I'm a little irritated by people who use words just, yeah. I mean, no offense, just my perception is that. That's it, yeah.
A memory came back to me, and I need to put in a plug for Marriage Encounter. And we learned to make a time every week to have work with your spouse on your marriage. And you would sit down and write a letter to your spouse, and she would sit down and write a letter to you. Because this is so important. When we talk or argue or whatever, we're saying these words or whatever. And as I've said before, sometimes we talk past each other. But if it's written down on paper, I can go back and read it again tomorrow. And also, often in a relationship, there's a power imbalance, and that I better not criticize him, because he's right most of the time, and I don't want to rock the boat. But when you write things down, not only can you write down what I think is wrong, you can also put down why I think it's wrong, what in my background is causing this to bother me, and say, I still love you, but let's work on this. So it really gets into the precision that Roger and Claire are talking about, that this is important in a relationship or even in a disagreement with a friend, to work on it.
I want to say something. I think Abram, your question is very good. What happens is that you should not hold yourself to a platonic standard of precision and then be disappointed in yourself that, okay, you're not being perfectly precise. There is no such thing. Precision by its nature is a process of identifying things with increasing precision. And when you find, so you're trying very hard to be precise, and you know that there is more measurement that can be done, you're putting it out there as almost like a hypothesis of saying, this is the best capturing I have. And when you discover that you're not precise enough, that you say, oh, that means I can be more precise, and going ahead and going to that next level. So it is not something where you kind of beat yourself on the head of saying, oh, I did not get that precisely. You kind of have that, but at the same time, it has to be, so it's a process of increasing precision and holding your ideas as almost, because this is again a crucial part of Jordan Peterson's approach. the purpose of precision is not academic. It is to guide your life. And you're using the feedback, you're taking action based on what you know at the level of precision, and you're using that feedback to increase the precision. So it's definitely a process, and it's very important to think of it as a process.